Talk to any off-road enthusiast in Australia and I guarantee that the chat will be dominated by established players like Toyota, Ford, Nissan or Mitsubishi. Love or hate any one of them, these brands have established themselves and their off-road stripes over the course of decades and are now producing some incredibly well-rounded product for both on and off-road use. But that won't stop newcomers like this car over here from coming to try their luck at the popular 7-seat off-road SUV segment. Enter the GWM Tank 500. Now this car has really impressed us at launch, but we wanted to find out how it fares against one of our favourites in the Ford Everest. Now let's get stuck in and find out. I'll say first up, there is a sizable price discrepancy between these two cars of more than $15,000, but both represent the pinnacle variants in their respective ranges. This is more of a comparison that looks at two top-shelf SUVs at different price points. We're going to take a look around the exteriors, dive into the cabins and check out the tech and functionality as well as spaciousness before going for a drive. Then we're going to decide which is a better suitor to on and off-road use around Australia, keeping in mind the $15,000 price gap to the Ford Everest. Let's start with a newbie, the GWM Tank 500 Ultra. The GWM Tank 500 is new for 2024 and makes its debut with hybrid powertrains only. There are two variants available to buyers, both powered by a petrol-electric hybrid system said to deliver a fuel economy of 8.5 litres per 100 kilometres. Under the bonnet sits a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine developing 255 kilowatts and 648 newton meters. Power is sent to a 4-wheel drive system through a 9-speed automatic gearbox. It can't quite tow as much as a Ford Everest, just 3,000 kilograms. But there is a suite of off-road goodies such as locking front and rear differentials, a low-range transfer case, a turn assist function for the tight manoeuvring, and a whopping 9 separate driving modes. Like the Ford Everest, its 4-wheel drive system can be used on sealed surfaces. Size-wise, it fits somewhere between a Toyota Prado and a Land Cruiser 300 series. There are a plethora of features included for its $73,990 drive-away price, including Napa leather upholstery, Infinity premium sound system, pop-out side steps, ventilated and massaging seats, and a power folding third row. That builds upon equipment already offered on the entry-level Luxe specification, such as a huge 14.6-inch infotainment touchscreen, sunroof, tri-zone climate control, and 18-inch alloy wheels. In person, I love its big, brash looks. The front end really is imposing with its big chrome grille and these striking LED headlights, and it does look like a big car inside and out. Now down the side of the car you will see a set of 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in highway terrain tyres, and whenever you do unlock the car, these pop-out side steps do give you that little bit of extra leeway to get inside the cabin. You can't miss a full-size spare wheel mounted smack bang on the rear tailgate. And when you do open it, it is a side hinge sort of rear tailgate door, which is a little bit novel, but at the same time, it is kind of annoying when you are in underground car parks. Storage-wise, you do get 98 litres of space behind the third row, 795 litres of space behind the second row, and a full 1,459 litres of space with all seats flattened. One thing I've liked is the electric operating rear seats, which do fold upwards as you hold the button, but you do have to hold the button while you are there. One other thing that I've found in the Tank 500's rear boot is the fact that there's storage in the door itself, which is kind of handy. In the blue corner, or the brown corner today, we have the tried and true Ford Everest, developed and tested right here in Victoria and around Australia. Where the GWM Tank 500 uses a petrol hybrid system to make forward progress, the Ford Everest Platinum sticks with a 3-litre turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel engine for its 184 kilowatts and 600 Newton meter outputs. The Everest range is available with a choice of turbo diesel engines, either a 2-litre twin-turbo 4-cylinder or a 3-litre V6 as you move up the range, with the Platinum offering only the flagship V6. These outputs are sent to the wheels through a full-time 4-wheel drive system and a 10-speed automatic transmission. It's enough grunt to tow up to 3.5 tonnes, bettering the GWM Tank 500 by 500 kilograms. And Ford claims the Everest will do an 8.5 litre per 100 kilometers on a mixed driving cycle. But there are still several driving modes: a locking rear differential, underbody protection, off-road displays for the infotainment, and of course a low-range transfer case for when the going gets rough. Reasons why you'd opt for this top-spec Platinum model grade include its panoramic sunroof, matrix LED headlights, larger 12.4-inch digital instrument cluster, 12-speaker Bang & Olufsen stereo, quilted leather accent seats, ambient lighting for the cabin, and a set of 21-inch alloy wheels. However, do note that Ford offers 18-inch alloy wheels with all-terrain tyres as a no-cost option. It also benefits from things like a 12-inch centre touchscreen, power tailgate, heated and cooled front seats, and tyre pressure monitoring, which are all offered on lower specified variants. Looks-wise, the Ford Everest cuts a smart figure on Australian roads, and it even looks at home out here in the bush. I like the high belt line that continues all the way around the car. Now, this platinum specification is accented up the front by a chrome grille, though not to the level of the chintzy GWM, and it also gets a set of 21-inch alloy wheels. Down the side, you're also getting silver roof rails, platinum badging, and fixed side steps, unlike the pop-out items on the GWM. At the rear of the Ford Everest, there is a conventional top-hinged boot, which is power-operated. Now, space-wise, in the boot of this Ford Everest, you do have 259 litres behind the third row, 898 litres up to the second row, and in total 818 litres with all seats down. A clear win space-wise over the GWM Tank 500. And the spare wheel is mounted on the outside underneath the boot as well. One final thing I want to mention is, much like the GWM Tank, these rear seats do fold up electronically. It might be priced $15,000 more affordable than the Ford Everest, but the GWM Tank 500 Ultra still offers a beautifully appointed cabin. In fact, I think it appears more visually impressive than the Ford Everest. The space is dominated by a huge touchscreen, and you will see trim highlights such as a wood grain effect inlays and starry panels in the dash. It all feels really nice, from the dash top to the center console surrounds and also the door panels as well. GWM has put impressive effort into making this cabin feel as good as it looks. There's also a lot of light afforded by that big sunroof, and it actually makes this space feel really gargantuan. Now, in terms of build quality, I've had no issues with this car either. The only thing that isn't to my personal taste is this wood grain trim insert. It does feel a little bit cheap to the touch. But one thing I am loving are these Napa leather seats. They are really soft to the touch, and they feel really soft and comfortable when you are on longer road trips. There is a good amount of adjustability to get yourself a nice driving position, and you can see a good all-round view throughout the cabin. There's also a massage function as well, and it's not just a gimmick. There is a nice cat paw prod in the back as you do engage that massage function. That is pretty cool and not something that you normally see at this price point. Storage-wise, you are getting a decent amount of stowage space around this center console area. There is a center console box down here, and you can hide away items down there if you need. It is quite deep, so that is handy, and there is this switchable little tray here as well. You're also getting twin cup holders in the center console there, wireless smartphone charger, and then down here you also have a little hidey spot for your charging devices, because there are 2 USB ports and a 12-volt outlet. One thing I do want to mention is the fact that I do really like how GWM has incorporated a lot of the driveline settings and functions into buttons around the center console here. They haven't really buried it in the infotainment system, and I really appreciate that fact because it's so easy to just go boop, boop, boop on the go, and then the car changes as a result. The GWM's infotainment system is pretty snappy to touch inputs and has plenty of content to discover. There's integrated satellite navigation, digital radio, off-road displays, and lots of settings to fiddle with. Wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto is available too. There is a decent amount of configuration available with that 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster because I've got it on a map display at the moment, but you do also have off-road modes and other alternative map displays as well. While I do appreciate the substantial size of the screen and the quick processing, unfortunately fingerprints are littered across the screen and aren't the nicest to look at. The carmaker has stuck with physical controls for some air conditioning functions, which is appreciated, but unfortunately there is no volume dial, which is a huge omission. There are various buttons along the center console for controlling the 4x4 system, seat amenities, and parking assistance. The back seat is one of my favourite places in the GWM Tank 500 because there is plenty of room for my 194cm tall frame. I've got great headroom above me here. There is a huge amount of legroom for my knees, and there's even decent space for my boots underneath the seat in front. To keep backseat bandits happy in the second row, there are sunblinds back here. You're also getting map pockets in the seat backs here. Air vents, air vent controls. This is tri-zone climate control. Ventilation for the seats on the outboard here, that is really handy to have, and USB ports down here as well. Now you do get a fold down center armrest which opens to reveal a pair of cup holders. And finally, one thing we love to see in 7-seaters is the fact that these seats slide and also recline, so you do have that ability to give the third row a little bit more space if needed. Unfortunately, easy fold access for the third row is only available on the driver's side of the car, which is a problem for Australian roads. But once you do slide it forward, it is pretty easy to slot into the third row here. Don't mind me just getting to the third row. Once you are back here, it is just okay in terms of comfort and space availability. My head is a little bit constrained by the roofline. I think kids will fare better in the third row here, but I think personally, I will feel a little bit more comfortable in the Ford Everest, so let's go check that out. The Ford Everest Platinum is a 7-seat vehicle that can fit adults in all 3 rows. Now, space is not exactly generous in the third row back there, but adult occupancy is doable. More on that in a moment. Let's start up here for now. Screens are all the rage right now, and similar to the GWM Tank 500, the Everest cabin makes its 12-inch infotainment screen the centerpiece. It's mounted in portrait format, which I think makes it the less in-your-face of the 2 cars, and doesn't distract near as much as the GWM Tank 500's cinema display. I've said this plenty of times before, I love the functionality of the Ford system. The integrated Sync 4 system has quickly become one of the better infotainment systems on the market, let alone for a large off-road SUV, and contains plenty of functionality. Not only is there native satellite navigation and digital radio, but users can connect to Apple CarPlay or Android Auto wirelessly. There's also a digital instrument cluster in front of the driver that can be configured to show varying displays and graphics. All screens are high definition and display bright, eye-catching colours. The Ford gets an instant win for including physical controls for the volume dials and air conditioning. Elsewhere around this cabin, there are soft materials everywhere you need to touch, and I love the fact that these seats do offer a little bit more support compared to the Tank 500. While they might not have the massaging function, I do appreciate the electric adjustability, the heating and the cooling functions. As well, while it might not have the same visual appeal in terms of its cabin presentation compared to the Tank 500, there are nice touches to the cabin, whether it be the nice comfy seats or the special platinum badging on the seats. I do like this cabin, even though it doesn't sort of stand out as much as the GWM Tank. You do have a drive mode selector dial down here on the center console and various buttons to change all the settings and functions of the car's systems. The center console also has storage options, including a lidded center console box for hiding away items, 2 cup holders down here in the center console, the Ford Chippy slot, that is really handy for going through the Macca's drive-thru, storage space underneath the center console here, and a wireless smartphone charger. One thing I really do like about the Everest cabin is you do get a 2-tier glove box down here and up on the dash as well. That is really handy for stowing away items. Well, clamber into the second row, and it is easy to appreciate the space I offer in the Everest second row. Now, I've got okay headroom, knee room and foot room, but it does feel marginally smaller back here when compared to the Tank 500. But in terms of amenities, you do have air vents and air controls down here on the back of the center console box, heated seating for the outboard 2 rows, a dark headlining, which does give it a little bit of a darker space compared to the Tank 500, but there is a good amount of light afforded by that panoramic sunroof. And you are also getting a fold-down center console with a pair of cup holders which pull out like so. Just like the Tank 500, the second row of this Everest does slide and it also does recline as needed, but it is so much easier to access that third row compared to the Tank 500, which I'll demonstrate now. Access to the third row is achieved in much the same way as a Tank 500. You pull this latch here like so, the seat slides forwards. You do have a little bit more of a wider aperture to get into the third row, so it is a little bit easier. But the fact is, you can do that action on both sides of the car. You can slide it forward on the right side and on the left side, which makes it easier for that school pickup or drop off. With space, while I'm back here, I do have a decent amount of comfort and I wouldn't feel super duper cramped on a longer drive. It does feel it's a little bit more roomy compared to the Tank 500, which is especially impressive considering that this car offers more storage space as well. But overall, I'm finding this is a pretty comfy space for third row passengers. It will be especially handy for kids. Now, we've had a play around the outside, run through the interiors of each, and also gone through all the pricing and specifications, but now it's time for a drive. Powering the GWM Tank 500 is a petrol-electric hybrid system which outputs 255 kilowatts and 648 newton meters through a part-time 4-wheel drive system. It's also matched to a 9-speed torque converter automatic. Now, in practice, when you do put your foot down, you do get a decent amount of shove from the powertrain. It's just when you are at low speeds, there are a little few hesitations from the throttle which don't sort of translate to on-road movement. It does take a little bit of get up and go for this car to actually exact all of its power. When you are rounding bends, this car does feel like it's a ladder frame chassis because it is a little bit of a lumbering giant. You do feel the car tip side to side as you do go around corners, and even when you jump on the throttle and on the brake, the car does pitch and roll forwards and it's not the nicest sensation. It doesn't feel quite as polished as a Ford Everest in that regard. And also, one thing that I do like about the hybrid in particular is the fact that it's really quiet in here. There's not that much road noise, there's not that much engine noise. It does feel a lot more refined than the Ford Everest and its big, lazy sort of V6 diesel powertrain. In most circumstances, the 9-speed torque converter automatic transmission does a pretty good job at deciding what gear the car has to be in at any given moment. But there are a few circumstances when you are getting up to speed limits, especially from a standstill, that there are slight hesitations and lulls between gear changes. It's not the nicest experience and something that you don't get in the Ford Everest. I've been driving this car around town for a majority of the week, and I found that it does have a pretty decent turning circle, and it does make it really easy to maneuver into parks. Don't get me wrong, this is a big car, but when you are sort of doing those 3-point turns and changing directions, it does have a nice 11.2 meter turning circle. And it does have a tank turn function as well, which does sort of make it so much easier to maneuver when you are off-road. If anything, the biggest detractor in this GWM Tank 500 is its driver monitoring software. So you do have a camera up here in the A-pillar which is monitoring you as you drive the car, and the system really does monitor you. So when you do maybe turn your head to look at the infotainment screen, or you are doing a head check outside the car will really alert you to actually pay attention and look ahead, and it is really annoying when you just want to change something simple like on the infotainment screen. One thing that I found with the GWM Tank 500 is when you do depress that brake pedal, it's not the most consistent action because it will be recuperating some energy and putting that energy back into the battery, but otherwise it will be doing friction braking, and it isn't the most seamless change between the two systems. One of the final things that I want to mention is a ride comfort. It is really plush over speed humps, sort of road joins in the road, and when you are going at sort of suburban speeds, it is really good at eating up imperfections in the tarmac. However, it's not until you get to low speeds and when you are going over things like cobblestones, that kind of thing can really upset this car, and it does jitter around at low speeds. Compared to GWM's claim for 8.5 litres per 100 kilometres on mixed driving conditions, the Tank 500 in my time has done 11.7 litres per 100 kilometres. That is higher compared to GWM's claim, but thankfully it only uses 91 octane regular unleaded petrol. For the most part, I really do like how this Tank 500 drives on-road. Let's go see how the Ford Everest fares. The flagship Ford Everest Platinum makes do with a 3-litre turbocharged diesel V6 engine. Now that outputs 184 kilowatts and 600 newton meters through all 4 wheels, and it is one of those systems that you can drive in 4-wheel drive on sealed surfaces, much like the GWM Tank. Now that is really handy when you are coming off the off-road path and you do come onto sealed bitumen. You don't have to really turn it to 2-wheel drive, but it is one of those things that is just a little handy feature as well. The Ford Everest Platinum is a little bit down on outputs compared to the GWM Tank 500, but in practice, it really feels like this is a punchier powertrain. You can put your foot down and there is a solid amount of shove from that lazy, torquey V6 engine, and it really does love to sort of just change down gear and get up and go. Matched to that 3-litre turbocharged V6 engine is a 10-speed automatic transmission, and in years past this has been a little bit of a bone of contention with some Ford owners, but in this application, in this Ford Everest, in this generation, the 10-speed transmission does do a pretty good job at selecting the right transmission gear at the right time, and it's only every now and then where you might sort of find it hunting around for gears, but for the most part, the transmission does a really good job. There is a really tall glasshouse in the Ford Everest, and it makes seeing out of the cabin quite easy. And I'm sat in a nice comfy driving position, finding I've got good support from the bolsters, and I've also got good support under my thighs as well. While you might be down on outputs compared to the Tank 500, this car does have higher towing capacity. It is 3.5 tons brake towing capacity, which is 500 kilograms better than the Tank 500. One thing that is a little bit more cumbersome compared to the Tank is its turning circle. You can find that when you are doing those 3-point turns around town and in suburbia, the 11.8 meter turning circle, it is a little bit more harder to deal with, and it just makes it a little bit harder to sort of change direction, really. I've found in this Ford Everest Platinum especially, the ride comfort is a little bit jitterier than I'd expect for a car of this size and for its intended application. I think it's the 21-inch wheels which are the downfall here, because The car really just does pick up minor imperfections and translate it through to the cabin. It's not nearly as plush as the Tank 500, but overall, it is doing a pretty comfortable job at on-road touring. It's just sort of little imperfections that do make their way through to the cabin. Fuel economy is a big factor in this day and age, and compared to this car's claim of 8.5 litres of diesel per 100 kilometres, we are seeing around 11 litres per 100 in on-road and sort of off-road application as we've driven through today. It's not bad, but it is a little bit higher than the claim. I do love the fact that the Everest has all of its driving modes and driving settings down here on the center console at your touch. It is really handy to have that right here on a dial, as opposed to sort of diving into the infotainment system and then changing it there. You don't get the same sense of pitch and body roll as you get on and off the brake and accelerator, and that is just a little bit of a nicer experience compared to the Tank 500. Well, we've driven these cars on-road, but while we're out here in the bush, I reckon we turn off the beaten track and see how these two cars fare. Every time we get the chance to drive a Ford Everest off-road, it is an impressive experience because this thing is so well polished off-road. Now, while the 21-inch wheels might not be the best choice for off the beaten track, I think this car does have a really good ability at sort of just getting over mounds and sort of trudging through ruts. There is a whole lot of ground clearance available to the driver, and this car really just does feel steadfast in its off-road ability, and I don't really feel like this car is going to get troubled too much at all. Don't forget that you do have a whole lot of driving modes that you can sift through as well, and they do handily sort of just display themselves up on the digital instrument cluster. So you can change them down on this dial selected down here on the center console, and you can cycle between towing, mud ruts, sort of slippery, icy conditions. There's a whole lot of modes that you can explore and use as needed. You do have a locking rear differential. It's not quite as good as a GWM 500 because it's got a locking rear and a locking front, but I haven't found in this car that we've needed it really. It's really just taking everything in its stride. One thing I love about both of these cars is the fact that there's screens, cameras, and sort of gauges that show you what the car is doing at any given moment. And it's all called upon thanks to a button down here on the center console. So if you push that, you will get screens that come up and you will see what the car is doing at any given moment. And it's really handy to have that sort of visibility about what each system is doing and also what's actually around the car as well. While the off-roading we've done today isn't that hardcore in terms of trickiness or anything, this car has just felt steadfast in its ability to sort of get over all kinds of terrains, and we have seen in the past that this is a really proven car. But let's go see the GWM Tank 500. A really novel aspect of this GWM Tank 500 is the fact that I've been driving a lot of these off-road trails today in complete silence because it does have that hybrid ability. Now, it is kind of funny to drive off-road and hear nothing at all apart from the nature around you, but there you go, that is a really nice experience actually. Around these off-road trails that we've been driving at the moment, there is a nice and supple ride experience that you get from the suspension, and it's something which I'm finding is really quite plush and compliant, and it's a really nice experience overall. One thing I've found with the Tank 500 is because those side steps do retract into the body, you do have a really decent amount of ground clearance overall, whether you are dipping down into bumps like we are at the moment or sort of breaking over certain mounds. There is a whole lot of ground clearance available to you, and it is really handy when you are on the trickier trails. The Tank 500 does have a tank turn function which can enable the car to do a tighter turning circle, and that is really handy when you are off-road like we are at the moment, but considering we are on a small and slight track, we won't give it a go just yet. There are a couple of off-road electronics and systems that make this car actually quite decent to get over all kinds of terrain. Now, you do have a front and rear locking differential, obviously a low range transfer case, and you are getting things like hill descent control, much like you do get in the Ford Everest. Those are the kind of things that you really do expect on a 7-seat off-road based SUV. Something that plays into the off-road technologies that you do get inside the Tank 500 is you do get a series of driving modes which can be called upon using the dial down here on the center console. It does have a little bit of a weird sound as you cycle between them, but that ability is there and it does change the car's systems as needed. The light off-roading that we've done today, it isn't the most hardcore, but We've just found that both of these cars have taken it in their stride. But one thing I have found is these cars really aren't dirty enough to take back to the office yet. So let's change that. Our little gathering here today was never really designed as a head-to-head comparison, but there are a few inferences I can make in how close this car comes to an established and respected player like the Ford Everest Platinum. The Tank 500 is really comfortable on the road, which is where I think it excels, but it's also really well set up for off-road use as well. Nothing we threw at the car today really fazed its off-road progress. Its plush ride comfort is really appreciated on roads too. But there are a few little quirks that might upset some buyers, the kind of things that aren't experienced on the Ford Everest. These include its annoying driver monitoring software, the lumbering body control, and also some hesitations from the powertrain. This is why some buyers might like to opt for something a little bit more proven like the Ford Everest. But I'd argue that the buying is better further down the Everest model range, especially when you get to a really value-driven variant like the Ford Everest Sport. That said, the GWM Tank 500 Ultra has really impressed me all around. It might not be to every buyer's taste, but there is a lot of ability packed into this car, and that's especially impressive given its sharp price point. If you've enjoyed this video or learned something interesting about the Ford Everest or the GWM Tank 500, be sure to give us a like on YouTube and stay subscribed to get all of our future content as it uploads. As well, you can read the full comparison review on Drive.com.au.